Here's an important question. Was Jesus really resurrected? It could be asked in a number of ways. Here's one. Wasn't that resurrection thing just a fake? Just a hoax? Or it could be asked as, didn't Jesus stage the whole thing? Or how about this one? Didn't his enemies, the Romans or the Jews, or his friends, the disciples, just steal the body? Or could he have passed out on the cross and recovered in the tomb? Or this one. Was it just a case of mistaken identity? They crucified the wrong guy, the wrong prisoner. Or, afterwards, they went to the wrong tomb. But the big question, the important question is, why is his resurrection so very important? Decades ago, while I was teaching in eastern Poland, a man told me about the church he was reopening in Novosibirsk, Russia. That's about a 2,200-mile, 3,500-kilometer drive southeast of Moscow. He told me of a college student, a student who was deprived of Bible knowledge by communism. That student walked into the church and pointed up to the front and asked, "Who's that man on the cross?" Is that shocking to you? It was to me when I first heard it. But now, not so much. The same Bible knowledge vacuum is growing in the West, in the U.S. and in Europe. And if you're a turned-off by the church millennial, maybe the church never really taught the Bible to you. So let's get started with a clarification. Resurrection is not the same thing as resuscitation. The Lazarus of the Just a Question, What Did Lazarus Say? Video was resuscitated, brought back from death to life, his old life. He lived, he worked, he got sick, got old, and died again. Resurrection, what happened to Jesus, is different. Resurrection is miraculous change, more than resuscitation. Jesus was made alive again, healed instantly, but still scarred from his brutal execution. It was definitely physical. He walked, talked, was touched, cooked, ate, and was seen before his ascension on multiple occasions. And once he was seen by more than 500 people. Those who say it was only spiritual are creating their own resurrection, not the one documented in the New Testament. So let's get started with the fake hoax idea. Some claim Jesus staged the whole thing. He just made it happen. It was fake. He did it. They say he knew, from his Jewish upbringing, the prophecies, the Old Testament prophecies of the coming Messiah, so he forced his fulfillment of them. He set up being betrayed by a friend. He set up being betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, to be forsaken by his men, to be crucified, to be executed with thieves. He set up how the soldiers would divide up his garments. He set up that no bones would be broken, that he'd be buried in a rich man's tomb, and rise again on the third day. But think about it. Jesus could not humanly, have staged even one of those things. It's not possible. And who would come up with the lame idea, and why, to orchestrate their own brutal crucifixion? This anti-resurrection theory just isn't viable. Others have said that his enemies, the Romans or the Jews, stole his body. Their motive would have been obvious: to produce the corpse a few days later and shut down that whole Jesus movement thing that was sweeping through and exploding in Jerusalem. But they never did. See, that theory makes no sense. It didn't happen. This anti-resurrection theory isn't viable either. Some have said his disciples stole his body to perpetuate the movement. However, the resurrection of Jesus was a major foundational truth that they never denied when persecuted, tortured, and executed. In the first century, huge numbers of eyewitness and second-generation believers died proclaiming the truth of the resurrection. They were totally convinced. People don't willingly die for their lies, deceits, and doubts. This anti-resurrection theory isn't viable in any way at all. Some say he passed out on the cross and recovered in the tomb. To which I say, go back and watch the Just a Question, What's a Crucifixion video. The What is a Crucifixion video. Watch it. Nobody survives that kind of brutal torture and execution, then sits around in a dark tomb for 3 days, recovering, and then pushes the grave cave stone away and walks out on those nail-pierced feet. And what about blood loss, open wounds, and unavoidable infection? There's no way he would have been convincing to his followers. This anti-resurrection theory isn't viable. It's actually ludicrous. Another weak idea is that of mistaken identity. They crucified the wrong guy. Not going to happen with the Roman authorities or the Jewish leaders who specifically wanted Jesus himself, dead. And they were eyewitnesses at the execution, as were his family and some of his, very few, but some of his followers. This anti-resurrection theory isn't viable at all. Another idea is that the grief-stricken, map-challenged women went to the wrong tomb. Well, then so did the grief-stricken, map-challenged men. And don't you think Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, the guys who buried him, would have checked it out? And what about the Romans and the Jewish leaders? Don't you think somebody would have pointed out that kind of a mistake? This anti-resurrection theory is not viable, and it's just illogical. Another anti-resurrection myth is that the resurrection was an idea injected into the story centuries later. Historically, just not true. The resurrection of Jesus was a central theme in the Apostle Peter's first public speech. It was just 7 weeks after the resurrection, and he spoke of it later and also wrote of it. And the Apostle Paul spoke of it, and he wrote of it in his New Testament letters to the Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Colossians, and Thessalonians. And the New Testament author of the letter to the Hebrews wrote of it too. All of this started in the weeks and months right after the resurrection. None of these were from even 1 century later. This anti-resurrection theory isn't viable. It just flat out contradicts actual history. None of these theories are viable. They don't work. The only viable explanation, miraculous as it is that the resurrection of Jesus actually happened. He rose from the grave just as he had predicted. He predicted it in Matthew 12, 16, 17, 20, 26, 27, Mark 9, 10, and 14, Luke 9, and John 2. You see, it was a central theme of the disciples' preaching afterwards. It was a central theme of the first century church and in every century since. The Apostle Peter, speaking for the disciples, declared that it was, and listen to this, he declared that it was a fact to which we are witnesses. And that fact has changed the world ever since. So why the resurrection of Jesus? Why did it happen? The Apostle Paul actually answered that. Here it is. Therefore, having overlooked the times of ignorance, God is now declaring to men that all people everywhere should repent, because he has fixed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness through a man, that is Jesus, through a man whom he has appointed, having furnished proof to all men by raising him from the dead. The resurrection of Jesus happened as proof that his judgment is coming, it's coming, and that his salvation message is true. Because of the resurrection, physical death has lost its sting, lost its power, and Jesus conquered spiritual death as well. Because of the resurrection, there is a solution to our separation from God. Jesus paid the price for our sin on the cross. He took the hit for us, and he proved his power over death by the resurrection. He's done his part. See that? On the cross and resurrecting, he's done his part. The question is, have you done yours? Have you done your part? If you have any question about whether or not you have done your part to get right with God, just click the 911 God link at the bottom of the Just a Question homepage. And if you would like more information, a more detailed explanation of the resurrection, visit eseeker.org. That's eseeker, eseeker.org. I'm John Morris. I'll see you on the next Just a Question.